If you're here for the science discussion on Project Hail Mary, that's happening at 2. Today, we're talking about building the AI native enterprise. So, really quickly, when I say the difference between AI enabled and AI native, what I'm really referring to is AI enabled is the old operating model now getting you to bottlenecks faster, which means you're bolting a rocket onto a buggy and hoping that it somehow magically gets you there. It can, but you can also hit a wall a lot faster. When I talk about AI native, I'm referring to a redesigned operating model that's built for continuous intelligence, faster decisions, and flow. So, with that being said, I'm going to jump back. I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers today. First, we have Melissa Reeve, best-selling author of Hyper Adaptive, a new book that just came out, which explores how organizations can become more adaptable in the age of AI. Some say she doesn't just teach adaptability, but that adaptability lists her as a personal reference. It's true. You can look that up. And also we have Brian Panisha. He's the Chief Product Officer at Enveris, and they help organizations see how value actually flows across the enterprise. For him, some say he doesn't even need to ask where the bottleneck is. It simply raises its hand out of respect. And finally, you have me. I'm your host, Daylon Walton, Vice President over here at Icon Agility. I specialize in AI and adaptive transformation. Some say that I help companies become more adaptive and that my beard became AI native sometime in early 2026. So I thought we'd get started with a timeless piece of enterprise transformation wisdom, which is one does not simply add AI to the current way of doing things. One does not sprinkle AI on top of a frozen legacy pizza and declare oneself a chef. Although honestly, I think that's exactly what a lot of organizations are doing. They're rolling out co-pilots, they're experimenting with agents, they're chasing individual productivity gains, and that's fine. Those things can be useful. But buying 10,000 co-pilot licenses and hoping, magical stuff happens isn't an enterprise AI strategy. Hey, we have a chatbot now isn't an AI enterprise strategy. And I've even heard some companies say, AI is going to be our competitive advantage, which is a little like saying email is going to be your competitive advantage. Everybody has it. Everybody's going to have access to those tools. The real question is, what are you actually going to do differently because you have them? And that's the difference between being AI enabled and becoming AI native. An AI native organization is going to shift risk to its competitors by sensing and responding faster than they can. Now, how do they do that? They do that by reimagining how work is being organized, how decisions get made, how investments get prioritized. An AI-enabled organization just adds AI to the way it already works. And this is where a lot of companies get stuck. They've introduced technology that can move incredibly fast, but they've dropped it into an operating model built for a completely different era. So now you've got a Ferrari that can go 200 miles an hour, but it's stuck behind 17 stop signs in a construction zone. Your new AI tool finished the new product strategy in 30 seconds. Neat. Unfortunately, it still has to go through governance review, and they meet every third Thursday. And for that meeting, you're going to need 2 spreadsheets, and one has to include a full-blown business case, naturally. But that separately has to go through legal, which, side note, doesn't actually use AI, but they're making policy on it. And once you get all through that, you end up with Gary, whose role in all of this remains mysterious, but apparently his okay is to proceed is essential. And there's always a Gary. Every organization has a Gary. So you haven't removed the bottleneck, you've just arrived at it a lot faster. An organization that's AI enabled might ask, how can AI make this 14-step process a little faster? The AI native organization will ask, why does this process even have 14 steps? AI enabled might say, hey, we saved 11 minutes writing that email. The AI native organization asks, why are we writing an email in the first place? That's the bigger shift. So it's not about speeding up the work. It's about rethinking what work needs to happen. What should AI handle? Where should humans add the value? What has to change in our workflows and governance and roles and decisioning so that organizations can act on that speed? So before I turn it over to Melissa, I want to get a quick sense of where the organization is, your organization is in its AI journey. So we're going to run a quick poll. Let me see if I can get the post tools working to run a poll. 1 second. Dun, 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 dun. Aha. So where is your organization right now in its AI journey? Are you still trying to figure out who owns what? Are you doing some early wins? You have some siloed progress? Or are you full blown across the enterprise? Now, wherever you land, the ultimate goal is to move beyond isolated tools and local wins and start connecting those gains across the enterprise writ large. Now, Melissa has been researching and looking at the larger shift underneath all of this for the last few years. How AI is pushing organizations away from fixed structures and periodic decisioning towards a more continuous, flow-based way of operating. And coincidentally, she also has a book coming out. There you
It's
go. There's your
out. It's out,
oh,
Daylon. It's
the book
out.
is out. And if you want to learn about it, you can look at it right there at the QR code. So turning it to Melissa, and I'll show the look at the results are. All right. We got a good bell curve going on here. Um, as I turn over to Melissa, when you talk about this movement from fixed to flow, what's actually changing and how are people addressing it?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And are you able to share the poll results? I wasn't able to see them.
I think I can. Let's see.
There we
Yep.
go.
Here you go.
All right. So we got a lot of people in early wins and kind of a nice little spike in localized progress, and some coordinated progress going on. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So I am going to replace the current chair. And
There you go.
so we are going to hang on here. Okay. So thanks for teeing that up. And I did want to start on this title slide because this is a metaphor that we were exploring as we were prepping for this webinar. And I think it really evokes the feeling of what many people I'm chatting with these days are talking about. And on the one hand, it feels like we're all standing on the dock at the marina and we're watching this boat take off called AI. And this particular boat is called AI Native. And it always feels just out of reach. And I know that on many of the webinars I've attended or been part of, we talk about this feeling of FOMO, and nobody can keep up. And I think we all have this general consensus that AI is taking off, and us poor humans and all of our limitations can't keep up. So, with this feeling, what I really want to talk about is not necessarily the boat and the gap, although we'll cover some of that too. But I really want to talk about that gap because that's the area that I feel like most organizations aren't talking about enough. Is how do we get from the dock to this speedboat, which feels like it's just accelerating? So we're going to talk about the gap, and I'm going to come back to the boat a couple of times as we're having this conversation. So first, Daylon, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me here today. Thanks for describing this notion of an AI native enterprise. You talked about the AI enabled enterprise, and quite honestly, even though we all are wanting to rush into the speedboat and becoming AI native, I actually think it's really important for us to go through this phase of becoming AI enabled first. And the reason I like to take a little pause here, and I know that the pressure is real. I know that all of us are feeling this pressure to reinvent, and we know that that's the ultimate goal. But it's important to go through AI enabled because there's so much goodness and so much learning that happens in that phase. So when we're going through AI enabled, so this notion of what Daylon was calling bolting on AI, what we're doing is we're learning the limitations of AI, we're learning how to work with it, we're learning what it can and can't do, at least in this moment. We're learning the flaws in our processes. And I know that Brian is going to certainly shine a light on those processes and why it's so important to find the flaws in our processes. Um, and I think that that's a critical stage that actually doesn't get enough credit. And it's important to do all those things because that's essentially the foundation. Like, how do you start to learn about this tool before you reinvent it? And in fact, the organizations that I see that rush into that invention without setting the stage, they end up burning through political capital, they end up burning through financial capital, they end up with a solution that's about 80% of the way there, and they end up with a lot of disillusioned people. So I think it's really important to set that foundation to go through that AI enablement before you rush into an AI native organization. And AI native in the hyper adaptive organization starts to look like an organization that can sense and respond in near real time. So that's one of the ways that I define a hyper adaptive or AI native organization. And so the question is how do you get from here to there? And before we dive into that, I want to talk about this meta trend that Daylon briefly mentioned. In the meta trend, and I'm seeing this across so many functions and industries and activities, is from fixed to flow. And sometimes I call it like fixed to fluid or static to dynamic, whatever you call it, it's going from episodic to ongoing. And it's interesting, like I'm even part of a subgroup of a think tank, and it's focused on change management. And one of the things we talk about there is this shift from change management as a thing. So imagine you've got a before state, and then you go through the change, and then you have this after state, and people are like, oh boy, here comes change again. And they kind of resist it. And the shift we talked about was managing the flow of change. So this now is this mindset, this assumption that change will always be on, and really setting expectations within the organization that whatever is true today may not be true tomorrow. And I think it really is resonant with the idea of continuous improvement, which of course goes way, way back. And yet, how do we get our organizations to think in this way, in this more fluid, always on, continuous way? And so I just wanted to paint a picture of some of the things that start to shift as we're thinking in this more fluid, more dynamic way. So your annual strategic planning might be continuous portfolio adjustment. And I hope I'm teeing this up for you well, Brian, because this is exactly what he's going to be picking up in his segment of the webinar. So static project funding to dynamic signal-driven allocation. Even, I've been playing a little bit in the HR space, and it's new to me. I've primarily played in the IT space and the marketing space, and it's really cool to be learning this whole new function. And they even talk about the job descriptions and how job descriptions are having a shorter and shorter shelf life. And they're breaking these job descriptions down into skills. And those skills have a short shelf life. There's new skills that are popping up. Remember when prompt engineering was going to be baked into everybody's job description? And now it feels like you just ask the AI to write its own prompt. And so these are the types of things that we're really looking for to bridge the gap, to move from fixed into flow or a more continuous state. Okay, so the question again is the beautiful rainbow between the dock and the boat. What is that rainbow? And in the book, I start to articulate how do you bridge the gap? And I call it the hyper adaptive model for AI integration. So, hyper adaptive is more than a book, it's a model. And what we start to do is we start to articulate these stages that organizations go through on their way from what I call a linear organization. So, that's strategy to execution, concept to delivery. And you think about all the layers of the hierarchy, you think about all the handoffs and delays that happen in a linear organization. We know that AI is going to compress both of those dimensions. And so, how do you iteratively and incrementally start rewiring the people, the processes, the roles, the culture? Because we know from all the work, I'm sure so many in the audience have done this transformation work. We know that Big Bang generally doesn't work. I mean, there's a 70% failure rate around transformations. And so what I've tried to do with this model is to start to take a new approach. It stands on the shoulders of giants. So anybody who's been in this space for a while will see the legacy of John Kotter and Peter Senge and Clayton Christensen, lean, agile. There's even some DevOps concepts in there. And so what I've done is I've extended those for the age of AI. And I want you to pay particular attention to these support structures because I think this is what I haven't seen articulated in a meaningful way in any other model. And so this is the humans you need to put in place in order to guide the organization from where it is today into this AI native space of the future. And I'm hoping that some of you out in the audience are nodding your heads and saying, oh, yeah, we've got some AI councils and we've got some AI leads. And I feel that organizations are intuitively moving through this because, of course, there's many people in organizations. This is not your first rodeo. This is not your first, first organizational change initiative. And so, but what I'm not seeing, for example, if you have AI leads, how are you programmatically supporting those leads? For example, have you just appointed those AI leads or AI champions as your power users? Or have you deliberately spun up a program that says, here's what the characteristics of a strong AI lead is? It's a person who can lead with influence without authority. It's somebody who can train their peers. It's somebody who not only has a grasp on the technology, but knows how to flip those resistors into advocates. How are you supporting those people? Do you have what I call an AI activation hub? So this is your monitoring mechanism. This is what's going to keep your organization evergreen. And imagine that Claude Fable comes out, and then it doesn't come out, and then it comes out again. Who in your organization is responsible for tracking that and spreading it to your AI leads who get it into the hands of the practitioners? And it's so important because what I see organizations doing is they're putting this cognitive load on everybody. It's everybody's job to keep track of AI. And that's like saying, everybody keep watching that speedboat. keep on top of it. And I think would be so much better off if we put the human infrastructure in place, put this wiring in place where it's somebody's job to keep track of this and spread it throughout the organization. So there's a whole book of this goodness. And of course, that's not our goal here today is to talk about the hyperadaptive model. But just know, as you're trying to move into this AI native space, there is a guide, there is a bridge to help get you from the dock to the speedboat, fire up that human infrastructure, and do it in a way that produces these durable capabilities that you'll need to become an AI native organization. So things like integrated learning loops, AI powered sensing, continuous adaptation, there's your flow. And an organization that's doing this right is Moderna. So the first thing that they did is they set their what I call their AI North Star. So they said we are going to develop 15 new drugs in 5 years with the help of AI. Now, if you have touched the pharmaceutical space at all, you know that this is a BHAG. This is a big, hairy, audacious goal that most pharmaceutical organizations release one drug in 10 years. And what this does is it provides an umbrella of psychological safety that says this is why we're using AI in the organization. And that type of umbrella provides the air cover for the rest of this to happen. And I just want to, before I move on, I just want to point out stage two, which is what we were talking about earlier. It's that task augmentation. It's some of that foundation setting you need to do, looking at your processes, figuring out where the bottlenecks are in order to move forward into this AI native space. All right, I've probably beat that drum enough. So as you move into stages 4 and 5 in the hyperadaptive model, it's all about organizing by value for flow. And again, I know that Brian's going to pick this up and start beating on this drum as well, and he's got some great tools on how to do this. But we're talking about something that, of course, is not new, but it becomes even more important with the age of AI, which is how organizing around value rather than function. And I want to shine the light on a couple of things here. I want to shine the light on one, adjacent competencies. So in this new world, we've got an HR person who can create their own onboarding videos. We've got a financial analyst who can vibe code really elaborate dashboards. And so by organizing by value rather than function, we really start to unlock these adjacent competencies and stop putting people into boxes that may or may not make sense for their true capabilities. And so by doing this, we actually unlock something that Agile was trying to do for a long time, which is to get the right skills, everybody with the right skills aligned together, regardless of function. And I think that AI is really going to unlock that. And there's organizations that are already doing this, breaking roles down into the skills and then assigning those skills to where they're needed most. So Unilever has a couple of programs where they're doing this type of AI matching. It used to be called Future Fit. I think they've changed the name to You Work. I think MedLife, I heard them talk on stage about something similar. And I do believe that this is the future. I also want to give a little shout out to Mick Kirsten's new book, Output to Outcome, because he's all about organizing in this way. You have your parent value streams, your child value streams, and really focused on that outcome rather than the output. Okay, so now let's take a little break, and I want you to just do a little self-reflection. So, where in your part of the organization, your role, your work life, is there either a once a year decision, a once a quarter decision that's quietly costing you and needs to move into this more continuous flow-based environment that we're heading to? And how could AI help you get there? And if if you're tuned in and you have an answer, I'd love to see it in the chat. Or if you just want to quietly self-reflect, that's great too. All right, so I'm going to go off on just a one slide tangent here. And I do this because I think it's so important, which is what happens to the humans. I get asked this on almost every podcast I'm on. And I'm so happy that the toxic annualized budgeting, love that. I'm so happy that the toxic narrative of jobs are going away is starting to disappear from the headlines. And we're starting to see some of the main models, the Anthropics, the OpenAI, start to back off of that. Because we know We know from previous automation efforts that this isn't necessarily true. When you look at DevOps, you look at factory automation, this is not the first time we've automated something. In fact, I've often talked about the washing machine. Like nobody wants to go back to beating their laundry on the rocks. Just nobody does. Nobody's missing that. And so what we want or what we saw is that people go from doing the task to building, monitoring, and maintaining the automation that does the task. And, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but sometimes people say, like, okay, Melissa, so where are all these jobs going to go? And I love to paint this picture because it's actually rooted in a video that I saw from 2018. And I would love the message of hyper adaptive to make it to all corners of the globe. And yet, I don't really love jet lag. And so I would really enjoy it if somebody out there would invent my little pod that I could have in my office, my home office here, and I could step into it and I could holographically be on a stage in Beijing, China, and I would be speaking Chinese in real time, gesticulating in the same way that I'm doing now, which you can't see because I'm on a Zoom camera. Um, like, wouldn't that be cool? And that's the type of innovation that we're talking about. And I'm going to go off on just one little more tangent because I just love this story. So Midjourney was one of the original image generators, and I think many people on this call might have been using it. They released a press release about a month ago, and they said that they're shifting into body scanning. Like there's a leap. And what's so cool about this story is that they're going to do it in a spa. So they're going to scan your body in 60 seconds by you going under into a spa-like environment, like with a tub. The image that they presented, of course, it was done by Midjourney, was all glowy and nice. But their goal was to, oh, did somebody find the link to it? Yeah. So this is really cool. So the goal was to do 1 billion body scans with ultrasonic waves in order to increase the body of knowledge around the human skeletal system, the human form, the human body, in a year. And I just think that's the type of creativity that we need to bring to the table in our organizations, in our thinking. And thank you for tolerating that little tangent. And I think it's important as we think about the AI native organization of the future, it's AI plus humans. Okay, so I think that's about my time. I'm going to leave you with this, and I know Daylon's going to revisit it at the end. We took the poll. It's based on this journey, and this journey is based on all kinds of conversations that I have every day where people are articulating where they are at on this journey. Most people are through the confusion zone. I think we saw that in the poll. Many people have their early wins. Most people that I talk to are in this AI bifurcation stage, which is we have the power users and then we have everybody else. If you go to that QR code, you're going to encounter this really cool conversational AI journey, or sorry, AI survey where you can just talk to it. I mean, you can type too, but it's more fun to talk about where you're at in your journey. It's going to ask you one follow-up question, and then you're going to see where you're at on this path, and it's going to give you your next 3 moves. And I'm not going to collect your email address. There's an option for you. If you want the written report and you want some bonus materials, you can do that. But I would just encourage you to play with it. It's kind of fun. And I think it's an AI native way of doing a survey. And so you'll get to experience that.
And we'll have links to all this at the end of the podcast, and everybody that gets a recording will have links to go check out all this. It's really cool. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Cool. So now I'm going to hand it off to Brian because I think he's got a really practical, really amazing tool to help. I've got the model, he's got the tool to help you move from fixed to flow. Brian, off to you.
No, great. Thank you so much, Melissa. And it's great reading your book to hear you also articulate some of the key points directly and some really great examples. So I'm going to go ahead and grab screen. And I think one of the themes that we're seeing with AI standing on the shoulders of the cloud and big data, standing on the shoulders of the internet, standing on the shoulders of the microprocessor revolution, is change is inevitable. And I really like how you describe the 1 year or the pace of change, because today, and our industrial customers, our airlines, they're dealing with disruption that's pretty constant. And your fellow authors within the IT Revolution Press, Melissa, have been writing about this for years. I think one of the best ones that I really enjoyed was in the DevOps Handbook with Jez Humble and Gene Kim. They talked about rehearsing change and Chaos Monkey, where Netflix, after an outage on AWS, practiced turning off services to see how their organization could respond to change. And today, to now, one of the best definitions I ever heard of architecture was the ability to change with speed and respond to change with speed safely and in a predictable manner. And when we think about the complexity that's happening inside of every technological wave, it's how do organizations themselves respond to change? And certainly structures of companies that were founded in infantry and command and control because communication cycles and feedback loops took months, the age of steam and rail, those structures still permeate many, many companies, especially in Western culture. So an adaptive enterprise that can respond to changing market conditions, technological disruption, is a very critical capability. And so leading into value streams, let's talk a little bit about why value streams are so important. And I think with every technological revolution, going back to industrial manufacturing and lean with Toyota Production System, they really understood by using scientific method for observing how value is created, primarily in the handoffs between different functions and sub-processes. Where do we find waste? Where do we find delay? Where do we find building up of inventory, large queues, large batches? That's very structural foundation of how an enterprise operates is challenged and made visible through value stream mapping. And so what I'm going to show you really quickly is an example of how to do this on a scale. And so streamlining business workflows, one could argue there probably isn't a better scientific process for quantifying that and measuring it than value streams. But value stream mapping, and we've done studies following all the, everyone from Womack and Jones to Karen Martin, Mike Osterling, all the way up to the modern times with Steve Piera and Dr. McKirsten. The process itself can take 600 to 1,400 hours of manual effort to map the value stream. And even with digital tools, and we say we cut that in half to maybe 500 or less, 400 to 500 hours, it becomes obsolete. The artifacts produced become obsolete within just a few short days. So how do we transform value streams into a living digital model so you always have a representative current state of all of the nested value streams or the layered value streams in your organization? And with that, be able to create and model scenarios, not only for human visual collaboration and organization around value, but also as context for AI itself. And so what I'm going to start with is, this is Enveris Intelligence, and this allows you to upload any kind of data source, and through AI vision and processing of massive volumes of structured or unstructured data, we can go ahead and say, let's look at a company. So what we're looking at here are markdown documents, which is a very standard interchange between AI systems from our public model, where we took 4 named publicly traded global financial services firms and just told our model to aggregate them into one chunk. And so from these chunks and the tokens that we processed on them, we were able to run an extraction. And from our own model that we've trained with machine learning, we've extracted all of these segments of business of this global diversified financial services firm. So think of the top 4 largest in the world. We just aggregated them because I didn't want to, in this session, produce, information on name specific companies. So these are aggregated together by our model in just a few minutes. We have asset management, merchant payment processing, think the credit card payments processors, group and voluntary insurance, retirement plan services, and this happens to be a B2B. So this company would take on your company's retirement plan, banking and payment technology services. And I want to describe that each of these segments has its operational value streams, its development value streams, its supporting value streams, and even materializes the perspective of the customer. How do we see our operations the way our customers do? So all of that is modeled, and the financial information of all of these companies that were publicly available, 10Ks, annual readouts, financial readouts, all of that information is public. So we went ahead and ran that in the model. So I'll come back into the model and give you a sense of what that does. So each of those segments of the businesses generated each of the items and workflows. So in this segment, we have the retirement plan record keeping and administration process. And all of the scores and all of the financial dashboard information is fused directly into the model. And again, I want to remind folks, the processing of these 2 markdowns that we created with our public model took about 10 minutes and maybe a few dollars worth of tokens. And so what we have now is we have the operational value stream for this B2B enterprise service. And I can also see this operation in the layers that Melissa was talking about, like in Dr. McKirsten's work. I can see it from the plan sponsor journey. So if I am a company and I want to hire this company to manage my employee retirements, I've got to do things like go through the APIs. I've got to hook up my payroll systems. I've got to integrate all those feeds. But I also need to understand how we support this. What is our service desk and help desk operation? And what about the software that keeps the operational value stream functioning? So all of this is generated in a very quick model. And it's not to replace the humans, but it's to escalate from the top of the model. Where are the top constraints? So that if we need to go from the predictive scanning and presentation of these models, where are the predicted top bottlenecks? And so through all of the public information of these 4 companies, it found that integrating the payroll feeds for the company whose retirement plan you're going to be taking on and managing is the top bottleneck. It's the top constraint in the system. So I may not need to go model every single workflow on day 1 and validate it with humans in the loop, but I can certainly know that I need to get into my operational value stream and now drill in to that workflow. And so what we can do with Enveris is we make it a very interactive process. So I can put up a QR code, and from any mobile device or laptop, people can come in and swarm and share what the metrics are on each of these things. So each of these items that have been mapped out, where are the constraints and where do we want to, and this was the one that is the top constraint. So it's automatically flagged by an agent that just scans for your top constraint. So when I come into that, I, as a collaborator, could add in the additional data. How many FTEs do we have? That predicted as value adding. We can score it. We can do all of those things to make it our own very quickly. And then from that point forward, that workflow that represented your top constraint is going to be baselined in the model for future scenario generation. So what I want to show you is, let's say you've baselined it and you can set a timer, and typically 5 or 10 minutes, because you're sending it out to the SMEs to come in and baseline that workflow. And you're doing it opportunistically. You're not going to do it for the one where there really are no monetary constraints. You're going to do it for the top constraints. But once I have that baselined, I can very easily spin up scenarios. And I could say, take a snapshot of the metrics from our transactional representation of the current state and put it into a graph database and bring all of the scores and financial information over. Or I can, and we pre-can some tokens depending on the industry or the customer. We might say apply manufacturing improvements, but I could also describe any scenario that I want. So for example, Melissa, we could take even some of your Hyper Adaptive framework and pre-set up some prompts and research of a model pattern and include that as one of the tokens to just supercharge that with a button, and you might even give it a time horizon. You could say applying Hyper Adaptive in 1 year's time, what would that ideally look like? Because you've loaded your information and your reference materials or your research that supports that. So I'll just go ahead and say create one from a current state. And what that'll do is it's going to copy everything over, including the financial information and all of the scores that I baselined. And sort of to speed this up, what I'll do is I'll go back to the original scenario, and I'll show an example of how you can do optimizations. So if I go in and I know that bringing in and integrating the payroll feed is one of the top bottlenecks, I can choose to do an optimization on that. And if I'm collaborating with a group of participants from their mobile devices distributed anywhere or at different times, they can put in their own prompts or say, yep, let's come up with optimizations that we could fit in 90 days. And I want to do maybe a people in collaboration workflow. So that generates the context of the value stream, the context of the scores, the context of the industry. And we all use AI. It can go out and do a lot of research really quickly and say, what are other financial services firms doing to address this type of constraint? So this is a fairly longer reasoning model. So it's going to come back with some suggestions. And this is where I could accept these, or I could copy some of them, or I can give it a new prompt or a new lens. But what I want to show you is when I import them, it's asking you, the subject matter expert, how much do you think it would take to implement this into your organization, and how much funding would you need to implement it in your context? And then that becomes part of the backlog of optimization items. So just to kind of go a little bit faster, this can be very collaborative. It can be supported and done manually. So it's just the collaborators' ideas, or you could augment it with AI generated ideas for any given single step. Or like I showed you right in the beginning, I can say reimagine this entire workflow with these prompts or these particular models that we've applied in the past. So what does that do for us? So if I go in and look at a report, what that allows me to do is to very quickly look at a scenario. And I just jumped into one that was already created for this same workflow. And when I've built up a scenario with my team of specific inline optimizations, I then ask the team to rescore the step, the single step you're optimizing, or the entire value stream. And in 2 or 3 minutes, you come back and change the flow time for each step. And then based on that, it will forecast the savings in flow time. So it's a 15% improvement in flow time. And it is going to have this impact. So with the same number of resources from the current state, I can reduce my target and I can improve the number of payroll systems that we bring in, or the number of payroll retirement benefits that we can manage. I can monetize what that is. So you get an investment grade, you get a comparison, what are the contributing improvements, and you get a comparison of your current state to your future state flow. And then Enveris allows you to track the reporting of that over time. So as your state, and I just put in some examples here for this demo, it's obviously an anonymized, not a real company. You're actually seeing how you are achieving that over time, tracking to your financial target, and the cycle keeps living forever. So every change that comes back into the system, I'll show one really quickly. If I go to my optimization table, and I'm always able to show a timeline. So I can navigate backwards and forwards through time. So I would start a new cycle. I'm not going to do that right now. And I would come in and I would say, all right, we implemented this. Here, let me do one that's committed. We implemented this change. And when I do that, it says, these were your estimates. What was the actual? So maybe it costs a little bit more, but we actually got it in a little bit faster. And I want to make this point. All of the improvements are the ROI and the performance change in the workflows themselves are quantified and validated, and they're saved. So the next time you come around and generate your workflows and you do an optimization, it's taking the things that worked in your organization and including that in the retrieval augmented generation. So it doesn't just go out to the large language models. It uses your local context and what's being improved over time. So I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions, and then maybe I can just show some of the other general features, right? So, and again, it did a bunch of different examples. I'll click into one.
We had one quick question. Someone was asking what types of data are used as inputs to get the model.
No, great question. So when you're an enterprise subscriber, we integrate this with your existing data lakes. So the retrieval augmented generation, when we use our public model, it's about 60% accurate. But then when it prioritizes the data, it allows you to then go in and spend your time concentrating on the delta. Where do you need to make it more accurate based on the predictive constraints ranked by what they're costing you? But if you use your own data, the accuracy goes much higher. So I can't show you like one of our global industrial companies, but they actually load their own internal financial documents. They load their work items, their strategic plans. So they have all of the public information on that company that's publicly traded, but then your private data. And then as you use Enveris over time, you are building up the internal data for what's working and what's not working. So here I can go backwards and forwards in time. And so each state transfer that occurs makes the prediction smarter the next time it generates a workflow. It even triangulates the workflows you've baselined and the workflows that you've improved to fill in the blanks in the organization to infer where there's probably a workflow process that needs to be materialized So it helps it uses AI to model really a model of your entire enterprise and how it operates through the lens of layers and nestings and groupings by business segment of all of your workflows in your enterprise. We even have customers loading in their architecture designs and requirements, and it will process and say, here's the sequence of events in our architectural process, and here's a way to write it to improve it. And you can swarm with collaborators on it, including business people, because it lays it out in a very structured, easy way to understand versus like a technical engineering document.
I know we only have a couple of minutes, and I still want to get to the closing slide and leave a little bit of time for Q&A. Are you good with where you're at, Brian? Do you need a little bit more time?
Yeah, and I'll just say, as each cycle you process, we learned long ago, people don't want to just look at a lot of graphs and charts, but we actually use the AI itself to tell you where it's seeing patterns and trends and things that you should be paying attention to. And everything in Enveris begins and ends with the financial impact of so all the financials are blended into your flow metrics automatically.
This is the point where I like asking people, hey, you remember the last time you mapped a value stream? How long did it take? And how useful was it versus what you just saw? I think that's the power. That's the power of the speed of AI. So really quickly to kind of close things up. So, what Melissa and Brian described today, it's not, another AI implementation. It's a different way of understanding your enterprise, about making decisions and organizing work and improving how value flows across it. But, from my standpoint, the challenge that every organization faces starts somewhere different depending on who you're talking to. Some have strong technology, but weak governance. Some have very enthusiastic leaders, but bad data. Some have, constraints, but that they can work on, but they don't have the ability to make decisions across functions. And as we all know, some are just using AI to automate things that they never even bothered to investigate to begin with. So I want to leave you with one last poll for those that are on here. What I'm interested in is, do you think you're ready to do this? And how do you know you're ready? And can you prove it? So that statement comes from, I do a lot of deep technical diving, and my instructor was fond of saying, when we were about to jump overboard, it was like, do you think you know what we're doing, or do you know what we're doing? Because enthusiasm doesn't make up for readiness at 300 feet underwater. So, the things I want to ask is, are your leaders on board? Is your CFO on board? Are you looking at the way roles can change? I think we've all seen the forcing function of, a company issuing an RFP and declaring work to start without getting their ducks in a row. And we all see how expensive that can be. And frequently it's ineffective. So that's where my curiosity is. I'm going to show one last slide while you guys are looking at the poll. So give me 1 second. All right. End the poll. I will share the results. Yeah. What does ready mean? Yeah, or the technology is ready, but the operating model isn't. Exactly. All right, I got to find my share button. Give me 1 second. All right, back to, I just lost my webinar. Hang on. I'll get there, I promise. I've done this before. All right, there we go. One last poll.
While you're doing that, Daylon, I am
All
going
right.
to wish everybody well.
Right.
I ended up back to back, so thank you so much. And
Thanks for coming.
Pulling this up, Daylon.
You're welcome. All right. So a couple of takeaways, and all of you guys will have this after the call. 3 things. One is Enveris's model accelerator, which kind of explains what Brian was talking about. and it's a sit-down workshop. How do we actually do this modeling? How do we validate it? How do we start making enterprise-level decisions? Really, really cool. And very quickly, one of the things I love about Enveris is it works really great out of the box. Like, it can do stuff on public-facing information. So all those governance issues about, oh, we're going to have agents running through our enterprise and deleting databases and going haywire, you can kind of sidestep that. So it's a really great way to kind of dip your toes in the water of enterprise decisioning without having a big governance and legal fight. The second one is what Melissa talked about earlier, which is the Hyper Adaptive Waypoint Finder, which is great. You can click on or scan the QR code. It's a free form text that'll plug you right into her maturity model, which is really, really cool. The last one is the one I want to talk about a little bit, is the AI Readiness Assessment, which is your company ready to go down this journey? It asks a bunch of questions about your organization. And importantly, what I would love for you to do, if you take it, share it with other people in your company, because you'd be surprised that not everyone in your company thinks the same problem is the first priority problem. So having different points of view from a CFO versus a CTO versus HR can be very valuable. So with that being said, I'll open up for QA for a couple minutes, and we will go from there. So thank you guys for joining. If you want to stick around and chat a bit, we can. Yeah. See, we have a question from Jeff. Hang on. Stop that share there. Everyone will get copies of all of this, of course. All right. Questions in the chat. Do we have questions in the chat? You want me to just sing stage songs to you the whole time you're in here?
Answered a couple quick questions just about Enveris. People ask, like, what was the model? How long did it take to train? That kind of thing. So we orchestrate across our own local model that's on our compute hardware. We orchestrate across reasoning models for higher value workflows or higher value things like coming back with optimization ideas. But we manage tokens to where there's no token cost because it's in our own proprietary model, all the way to using mini models for the cheapest tokens on lower value workflows or lower value constraints and activities. So it's an orchestration. And when customers deploy an enterprise version of Enveris in their own environment, we can hook to your models and deploy even local models inside your firewall so that you avoid some of the token catastrophes that you're seeing out there. Hopefully that answered that question.
All right. Look at that. Right on time at 11 o'clock. That never happens. We always run late. Well, all right. So I know Melissa had to run because we've got her back to back on multiple webinars and podcasts. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us, showing us Enveris. I hope you guys found this insightful, hopefully a little entertaining. Excuse my technical glitch here and there for navigating around. But once again, everyone will get the recording. Everyone's going to get the links to the respective accelerators and Melissa's free Waypoint Finder assessment, my free Waypoint Finder assessment. And I hope we can have some meaningful discussions going forward. So thanks again. Happy Wednesday. Is it Wednesday today? I think it is Wednesday.
It is. Thanks, Daylon, and
happy
thanks
Wednesday.
everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye.